There's something special about fall. As the nights draw longer and the days get colder, a lot of people start mourning the summer. However, there's just something cozy about autumn. The crisp air, the decaying leaves, the obnoxious amount of pumpkin spice everything. What is up with that? Seriously, pumpkin spice salmon, chicken sausage, Gouda, hummus, whatever, you name it, they got it. How about adding a little spice to your cat litter? I have no faith in humanity. Okay, pumpkin spice is going a little too far, guys. Honestly, I'm a little scared of the monster we've created. Anyways, I'm trying to get to the point that obviously it's the best time of year to stay in, away from all of that, and read a good book. From moody and creepy mysteries to downright magical and cozy adventures, these are my top recommendations to read in the fall. But real quick, this video is a paid partnership with Podium as they're gearing up for the release of Blood of a Novice, the first book in a new series by David Ashura, and narrated by the one and only Travis Baldry, who I'm gonna mention again later in the video. The book is releasing November 8th, and for this collaboration, I was sent the brand new trailer of the book to reveal to you guys, so here it is. It's got a talking panda. What else can be said? This is the first book in a new series called The Eternal Ephemera, if I'm pronouncing that right. But it does take place in his anchored worlds, which he already created, so you're gonna see some familiar characters and maybe even some cameos. Honestly, I'm excited to read this. From what I've seen so far, it looks like it has a very strong advancement system. Also, it seems to be what you want to see from like a military/magic academy type of story. Links to where you can pre-order it, as well as a link to Podium in the description. Now back to the video. Starting off with one of my all-time favorites, and I would say a very underrated young adult series that doesn't use a lot of the common tropes. The Old Kingdom trilogy, also called the Abhorsen trilogy by Garth Nix, starting with book 1, Sabriel. In a land where a wall separates the unruly, dangerous Old Kingdom from the modern and magicless world, similar to ours with home appliances and cell phones and all that, a young woman named Sabriel attends her final college semester, but a messenger carries news of her father's disappearance. Armed with knowledge of magic from her father, the Abhorsen, Sabriel goes beyond the wall and into the Old Kingdom to find her father and finds her destiny in the process. The Old Kingdom is pretty much like if the Pevensies went to Narnia and discovered it had been overrun by the undead like 200 years ago. There's a bunch of evil necromancers in this kingdom, but there's only one Abhorsen, and the Abhorsen lay the dead to rest and make sure they stay there. Their charge is maintaining the border between life and death, righting the wrongs created by necromancers or others who pervert the nature of life and death. Now, while this is young adult, it appeals to adults alike. There's a lot to enjoy here, and in my opinion, it's better than most of the YA books out there. It shares the attention and description of detail as the Earthsea series. So if you like Earthsea, you should check out Sabriel. Or even if you don't, read Sabriel. In the Old Kingdom, the dead wander the forest and the common roads, and it just feels like a vast wilderness that's been untamed by human hands for centuries. The descriptions of nature are beautiful and vivid, and the world is mysterious. And I also really like Sabriel as a character. It's really nice to have a young protagonist who starts off already capable but lacking experience. There's also one of the best animal companions I've ever read in the form of a talking cat. Mogget the cat is an unforgettable character. Very cheeky, such a fun character. Now, the nice thing about Sabriel is that it's self-contained and it has a satisfying conclusion, so you don't need to go and read the next two if you don't want to. Book 1 was written to be a standalone, but those are out there if you want to spend more time in the Old Kingdom. And I guarantee you're probably gonna want to. By the way, the audiobooks narrated by Tim Curry are amazing. I'd recommend those. More people need to read this series. It's unique, yet it also feels like comfort food. Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. I told you I would mention him again. Legends and Lattes is sort of a story that shows you that it's hard starting something new when you've only done one thing your entire life, but that maybe it's worth it. By now, I'm sure you've heard of this cozy fantasy. It follows a barbarian orc in her 40s who decides to settle down and start a coffee shop in a small village that doesn't even know what coffee is. It's basically a Hallmark movie that's set in the Forgotten Realms. There's coffee and cinnamon rolls and a very gripping story. What else could you want for a fall read? Honestly, for some reason, I thought I wasn't gonna enjoy this one. I don't know why, but I ended up really liking it. It is a cozy slice-of-life fantasy with low stakes that's perfect to read in the autumn. It's the fall. How can I not recommend The Hobbit? The vivid descriptions of nature as well as food. There's a certain level of coziness to it. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. And the whole real temptation for Bilbo throughout his whole adventure is his desire to return to the pastoral home of the Shire. And can you really blame him for that? Now, the next recommendation is The Leech by Hiran Ennis. This was a recent read for me, and basically it's like the fusing of gothic literature with a post-apocalyptic sci-fi where two parasites are waging war over the control of humanity. What? And it's kind of a lot to wrap your head around because the main narrator is a parasite that's taken over numerous hosts. A doctor has mysteriously died, and their replacement must investigate what happened. But in this world, all doctors are part of an interconnected organism that takes over the minds of young children eligible to be integrated and become doctors. Unknown to everyone, this medical institute is actually a hive mind. It's a parasite living within that takes control and teaches the world's doctors. Now, in its investigation, the replacement finds that there's more than one parasite that's interested in humanity and finds something lurking deep within the minds. The minds, not minds. I will say the pacing is a little all over at times and the narrative can be kind of disjointed, even though that's the intention, but I still really enjoyed it. Now, this is a new release novel. I think it came out just in September, and the reason I wanted to read it is because I realized from the synopsis that it sounds quite similar to the book that I'm writing. Both have a doctor investigating the death of another doctor. Both have a very isolated setting. Both have a parasite that's kind of sentient. I was kind of frustrated, to be honest, when I realized this sounds a lot like my book. My doctors are not part of a hive mind, though. There's that difference. But thankfully, after reading it, it is quite a bit different from the book that I'm writing, so I'm glad about that. Though there still is kind of some odd similarities. Even chapter 1 of this book takes place on a train. So does my book. I thought I was being really original with my story, but apparently not. Time to rewrite and revise, I guess. This book is very chilling and atmospheric, and it just feels kind of foreboding, and I think it's a great book to read in autumn. For well over 20 years, the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher have tingled spines with supernatural film noir mysteries. This series is a mix of campy detective novels and campy urban fantasy. I'm talking a hard-boiled detective, mysterious femme fatales, combined with magic and monsters. Our hero is Harry Dresden, a Chicago private eye who specializes in the supernatural. Now, Harry's always down on his luck, he's always short on rent, and always in trouble with monsters and intersecting with grisly crimes. In the opening pages of Book 1, he's called in to consult on a bizarre double homicide involving two lovers. He's also hired by a mysterious woman to investigate a disappearing husband, offered a suspicious bribe to look the other way, dodges a snooping reporter, and then goes on to look for clues. And as much as these are love letters to detective novels, they're also love letters to fairy tales and epic myths, which is surprisingly the perfect combo. I'm fairly new to this series. I'm listening to the audiobooks right now and just finding them to be so much fun. I can't wait to read more, and I will be reviewing these on the channel when I get the time. Next, we have The Book of Lost Things by John Connolly. For some reason, autumn feels like the perfect time for some fairy tale retellings, and this happens to be one of my favorite renditions of that. The story takes place in World War II era England, and we're introduced to young 12-year-old David, who has just lost his mom. And his dad is soon getting remarried. Soon enough, he finds himself with a younger brother who he absolutely hates. And in his depression, David starts to have these kind of disassociative episodes, in some of which involve hearing whispers coming from the books on his bookshelf that him and his mom used to read. And this is when he first sees the Crooked Man, who is sort of a Rumpelstiltskin type of character. One late night, David hears his mother's voice calling to him, asking him to rescue her from something terrible. He follows the voice and ends up going through this hole in the garden wall, and just as this German bomber crashes into the garden wall, he ends up in this fairy tale land with no way of escaping. And things go very terrible pretty much right away as he embarks on a quest to rescue his mother. It's also an account of one boy's inner life and imagination, and also coming to terms with the death of a parent. In many ways, it's sort of like a psychological study as well. But keep in mind, this gets pretty dark. It is a dark fairy tale story for fans of magical realism. You'll see some familiar characters, but this is not Disney. This is more so Guillermo del Toro in style, so don't go in expecting like a Disney fairy tale. These fairy tales are kind of stripped of any romanticizing. It's more so close to the original kind of creepy Grimm's fairy tales with more of a somber twist, but the writing captured me right away, and just the eerie fairy tale atmosphere I thought was really intriguing. I think this is the perfect season to read a book like this. This next recommendation is for all those old school traditional fantasy lovers, and that is The Runelords. This is one that I think is very underrated. I don't see a lot of people talking about this series whatsoever, despite it having a super interesting magic system. It has some extensive world building, and it has a very cozy autumn opening to it, which is why I'm putting it on this list. Well, one of the reasons anyway. Now, the main highlight of this series for me is the whole endowment system and using ruins. Any person can opt to give an aspect of themselves to someone else. Those aspects are things like health or speed or strength, but the givers of such things are going to be greatly reduced in whatever quality that was. If they give their health, they're going to be sickly the rest of their lives, or if they give their attractiveness, they're going to be ugly, and commoners will sacrifice their attributes to their lords for protection or money or whatever they need. Now, the recipient of these endowments, they gain in those attributes. So the main character, for instance, he has like the strength of 4 men and the speed of 2 or something like that. And besides creating some very obvious ethical problems, it also kind of starts like a modern day nuclear arms race where all these warlords are trying to become stronger than their enemies until they become so powerful and destructive that they're literally a threat to the world. Which brings us to the antagonist, who has the power of like thousands that he's taken. So the people receiving these endowments basically become these supernatural godlike beings with all these powers, while the givers have to permanently suffer, and Farland does a good job at showing you the cruelty of this. Now, being published in the 1990s, it's definitely a product of that time. There's a lot of familiar fantasy stuff in here, but I think if you're a fan of Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn by Tad Williams, or the Rift War Saga by Feist, then I would definitely recommend checking this out. A Night in the Lonesome October by Roger Zelazny, I would say is the perfect book for October reading, considering the book is divided into chapters, each taking place on one day of October. While it's kind of past the time now, you could read a chapter of this every single day in October. I've heard that some people do that as like a tradition. However, I feel like you're just gonna want to read ahead anyway, because some of the chapters are fairly short. This is a tale heavily influenced by H.P. Lovecraft. The title is a line from a poem by Edgar Allan Poe, and you're going to see some famous characters appear from works by Bram Stoker, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Mary Shelley, and many others. It all takes place in London. Well, mostly. The basic concept is that a variety of famous literary and historical figures, as well as monsters, are all playing a mysterious game. the fabric of reality thins, and doors may be opened between this world and the realm of the great old ones, and the players in the game need to take sides to either close or open these doors. A Night in the Lonesome October is narrated from the point of view of Snuff, a dog who happens to be Jack the Ripper's companion, and Jack is one of these figures involved in the game. Throughout the story, the players are slowly forming alliances, making deals, and even killing off their enemies. But the majority of the story is the interactions and discussions of the animal companions of each player. Now, the wonderful, clever narration really gives you zero exposition. It throws you into the mess of things while delivering some hints and clues to grab onto. Now, Zelazny is an author I'm just getting to, and I can tell he has great skill when it comes to writing, especially when you look at his use of language and puns and his style. The narration of Snuff the Dog is fantastic. Now, there is an audiobook version narrated by Zelazny himself, which is really great, or there's a more common audiobook version narrated by Matt Godfrey, and he does a fantastic job at narrating as well. He gives each and every animal and other character a unique sounding voice that I thought was really great. However, if you do go the audio route, you're going to miss out on the 33 full-page, delightfully macabre illustrations within the physical copy. It's a fairly clever and light story with some Lovecraftian overtones. It's hard to say what genre this falls under. Comedy, fantasy, gothic horror, detective mystery, it's kind of a mix of all of those. There's no doubt this is the perfect book to read on a lonesome October night. The Night Circus by Aaron Morgenstern. I think you kind of saw this one coming. There doesn't need much explaining. This is definitely suited for the autumn. You got lush imagery of a mysterious circus that arrives at night without warning. You got two magicians competing against each other. You get the gist. I'm sure you've heard about this book a lot by now. I enjoyed this one, but I also felt like there was a lot of description that just felt kind of indulgent. Writing in present tense, third person also kind of gives the narrative sort of a distant feeling, but I can see why many people do enjoy this book, so if you're in the mood to read about a mysterious circus, then I'd recommend it. Now, if I could recommend one series for this list, it would be the Discworld books by Terry Pratchett. These books may have begun as just a clever deconstruction of the cliches of fantasy fiction, but they soon became something so much bigger. Extremely satisfying and witty moral comedies about humanity that are all set in an incredibly creative fantasy world. And what's great is that there's several series within Discworld, and you can choose where to start. I always recommend either starting with the death books like I did, or with Guards. What I find funny is the only character to appear in almost every Discworld novel is Death himself, but despite looking exactly like what you think Death would look like, he's probably the sweetest and most decent of all of Pratchett's characters. Like I said, he likes to deconstruct tropes. Discworld is pretty much a love letter to reading, and it isn't just comedic, it's full of complex characters and deep themes. Overall, it's pretty much the coziest series that I've ever read, and I'm always left feeling happy after I read them. So those are my fall fantasy recommendations. I'm gonna have links in the description to where you can purchase them for yourself if you're interested. Those are affiliate links. They help me out as well. Let me know in the comments what your fall reading recommendations are. Okay, I better get going.